Good afternoon. I'm Peggy Hill, the Previews Committee Chair of the San Francisco Opera Guild and Vice President of Chapters. The Previews program has been an integral part of the Opera Guild's chapter's purpose: arts education, community outreach. Although live in-person lectures are always the most stimulating, these virtual previews are an asset to many of those who cannot attend the in-person event. This program, of course, would not be possible without the #1 technical organizer and guru is for everything, John Morris, but along with his assistant, Teddy Reich. So thank you so much. And today, critic and journalist Ken Smith is our speaker, and he has covered arts and culture on 5 continents. Since 2004, until the pandemic, he has divided his time between Hong Kong, where he is the Asian performing arts critic for the Financial Times, and New York, where he was the US correspondent for Gramophone magazine. He is the author of Fate, Luck, Chance: The Making of the Bone Setter's Daughter, and he served as a consultant to many cross-cultural projects, including David Henry Wang's bilingual comedy, Chinglish and Kung Fu, a musical based on Bruce Lee. Ken Smith is certainly the perfect speaker to give us background and insight into the opera Dream of the Red Chamber. And to make this program more interactive and interesting, we need you, the audience, to participate. Please enter your questions, your comments into the Q&A. Look for the Q&A button at the bottom of the page. And with that, I'm welcoming and looking forward to Ken Smith telling us more about the Dream of the Red Chamber. Welcome, Ken Smith.
Hello, I'm very happy to be here and here to really celebrate the return of Dream of the Red Chamber to the San Francisco Opera stage. This is the first of San Francisco's commissioned operas to actually return to San Francisco for a second round, for a revival. So we're very excited about that. And I'd love to be, with you in person and talk about this, because I could really see a show of hands, or saying, okay, who had been with us back in 2016 when the opera had its premiere, and who is coming to this new? And so I would kind of probably pitch my comments the way that the crowd looks, but now I'm just going to have to go half and half, assuming that some people have at least seen the opera and know what we're talking about, and other people are coming to it totally fresh. Back in 2016, I did these talks with David Henry Wong, the librettist, and we tried to figure out what to do, and I'm not sure which one of us came up with it, but Downton Abbey had just finished its run. So at that point, we just came out and said, okay, Dream of the Red Chamber is Downton Abbey times China. And the idea, as far as it went, was actually quite a good comparison, because it is, they're both sprawling tales that have many different characters, hundreds of characters in the case of Red Chamber, and different storylines, each of which progress at a different pace within the story, the overall story itself. It's also very much an upstairs, downstairs type of relationship between a family and the help, the hired help of the building, and that is very much a source of a lot of the stories, a lot of the tensions, a lot of the humor. And ultimately, both of stories are historic tales of basically a household in a historic moment. And it's not just the decline of the household, but that household is the metaphor for society at large. And in both cases, some people in the story see that this is a way of life that will never end, that will end and will never come again. But most people really don't notice that. And so in that regard, it is kind of the Downton Abbey of China, of Qing Dynasty China. But where it's different is very, very strong and significant. First of all, there are more than 400 characters in Dream of the Red Chamber. And also, this is a story that readers just go back to time and time again. And while, yes, there are probably parties where people binge Downton Abbey after the season ended, I don't think it's quite the same thing. the characters of Dream of the Red Chamber have entered the permanent repertory of the culture, and people identify them on a very, very personal level. Also, I think one of the differences here is that the book, part of its mystique, in fact, was that it was never completed as a novel. And Dream of the Red Chamber is incomplete also in the way that Turandot is incomplete. And that not because the author died too soon, but because the author couldn't figure out how to bring everything to a close. I mean, yes, there was the sketchbook, there was the sketch pad of everything that should be there, but the decisions of how to balance everything just really sort of okay, we put that in the drawer, and then they would go back. Both creators, both Puccini and Mr. Tsao, would go back and work on smaller portions, and they'd refine earlier portions, and it would keep going. Um, as a result, the Dream of the Red Chamber circulated in manuscript in incomplete stages, and when it finally reached the level of publication, you have a lot of editors and one particular editor who would, uh, in some ways, be very intrusive, because the idea was it was better to finish it than to just leave an incomplete work out there. And whether it was finished in the way that the original author would have finished it, that is a sort of detail, and we'll fudge that. We have a finished book now. And so part of what has drawn readers to this is not just a story that they identify with, and the idea that um, uh, the characters resonate, the story resonates, but also the ending is kind of not satisfactory, which sort of leans everyone to make their own ending or to add to this. And Chinese readers are often very activist in their reading anyway. They'll write in the margins, and sometimes what gets written in the margins gets published in um, subsequent editions if you know your reader is prominent enough. But what you've had now is a case study of fan fiction that started even before it was published officially, and has continued with abandon afterwards in many different versions and with many different endings that people have just sort of added into themselves. And this kind of continues, this relationship with the material continues to the present day. And I happen to be zooming in from home, so I pulled a couple of things off my shelf. This is a book that just came out, actually, called Four Treasures of the Sky. It's written by Jenny Tinghui Zhang, and her main character is named Lin Dayu, who happens to be the name of the heroine, the tragic heroine of this story. She doesn't explain anything. She just assumes that when she talks about tragedy and stuff that references to the story that go in her own story, references to Dream of the Red Chamber, that you either know it or you have access to Google if you really want to find out. So this is just a situation where she just assumes that people know. Another book, Murder in the Red Chamber, the same characters of this story written into a murder mystery. It's one of these stranger versions of this, and also Hung Lo Fortune, which are all the characters put together by HSBC to show you how to invest your money according to the philosophies of the characters. So they already assume you know the characters before you start into this. So it is quite an amazing relationship that a culture has to this book. I don't think that we have really anything in English from any country that equals this. It's in league with Tolstoy, with War and Peace, but in terms of the scale of the story and the number of characters. In French, it's in league with Proust because, well, in part again because of the scale, but also because of the fundamental way of writing, the loose storytelling, and in a way, the idea of playing with chronology and being very, very loose in a dreamlike manner, and the associations of the mind. So that, in a way, is similar. Then you also have, of course, Cervantes, and the idea that Dream of the Red Chamber, Don Quixote are both very much national ideas. The entire spirit of the people is recognizable from hundreds of years ago today. in this book, and in part because I think Cervantes does a lot of cultural criticism. He starts with, makes fun of the chivalry tradition, of knighthood, and likewise, Dream of the Red Chamber makes fun of the Confucian tradition a lot, because of what people are supposed to do, and yet what really goes on underneath that surface of moral clarity. So you have a situation of, how do you take a book like this, which is 2,500 pages? I mentioned War and Peace. It's twice as large as War and Peace, by the way. How do you take a book like this and turn it into a digestible 2.5-hour opera with only basically 8 characters? And that is part of what we're going to talk about today. I think one way to look at this, that it was published under actually several titles. So if you find a book called Story of the Stone, it is probably also Dream of the Red Chamber. It was also called for a while 12 Beauties. Now both of those titles are irrelevant for us today, because the Stone is basically relegated in David and Bright's version to a very small section in the prologue and a couple of references throughout. 12 Beauties, okay, there are only 8 characters, so most of the beauties did not make the cut here. So we have to deal with a very different approach to the scope. But looking at it word by word, you have Dream of the Red Chamber. Well, Dream, Hong Lo Mon is Red Chamber Dream, is the literal translation of the Chinese. Dream, there are at least 20 dreams in this story, and they serve to foreshadowing. They serve to sort of process and reflect what had happened before in a different way. But it also sets the structural tone, which lends to a very free sense of chronology. One of the situations in this book is, even though it spans several years, you're never really sure how old the characters are at any one point, or when things are happening, or what, to a large point, leads to the next event. Sometimes you're left to figure that out yourself. You get to our next word in the title, red, and anyone who's been to a Chinese wedding, you know that red is a symbol of fertility in marriage for women. But it's also, for men, a sign of virility, a sign of vitality. And so by using that, you already set yourself up for a bit of gender fluidity, in which the original novel definitely traffics in, and in which you see a bit of that in the opera too, as we go into it. Also, when you get to the chamber, the Red Chamber, this is the area occupied by the young unmarried women in the family, and Bao Yu. And Bao Yu is the male figure. He's about 13, 14 or so when the novel opens. And technically he should be kicked out by now, but his grandmother, his paternal grandmother, is extremely fond of him, and he lets him stay around with the other women and with the women, and they have a grand time. And he, much to his parents' consternation, his parents are very, upright Confucians, and they want him out and also studying and doing things, not just playing around with his young female relatives and the female servants. So what you run into here is a setting that you have fantasies from both men and women, readers. The women, sort of aspirational, that this is what a really rich family is like, and this is what it's like to live in this kind of setting. And the men look at Bao Yu as saying, wow, he's still in the women's quarters. And so this has fueled a lot of readership, and a lot of the appeal to the story, including our composer, Bright Shang. And so let's actually turn to the story while we're at it now, and look at the synopsis of what this opera is about. The prologue opens with a monk telling us about this mystical world where there's a stone that has sustained a flower by dropping water collected from dew. And for thousands of years, they lived this way. And finally, the stone and the flower approach the monk, and they say that they want to appear on earth. They want to become human. They want to actually meet and continue their relationship in a different means. The monk tells them this is not a good idea. Just forget about this, but they come to earth anyway. And that's the prologue. The opera opens with the flower now becoming a woman, Dao Yu, who's an educated but kind of sickly woman, very much in the operatic consumptive mode, as we'll see, and recently orphaned. So she arrives by boat at the Jia family compound, and she meets the family. She meets the grandmother, and she learns two things. One, that the eldest daughter has become a concubine to the emperor, and secondly, that she sees that there is this young, very wild kid running around, dressed in red all the time, Bao Yu, young and extremely brilliant by reputation, and also who was born with a piece of jade in his mouth, a very auspicious symbol. And of course, to the reader, already symbolizes that this is the stone reincarnated on Earth. Bao Yu's paternal grandmother, as we say, dotes on him constantly, and also loves Da Yu's mother. Da Yu's mother had been her favorite child. So she is very much wanting them to play and get together. Now, Bao Yu's own mother is not happy about this relationship at all, and she has the same relationship as I think any daughter-in-law to her husband's mother. So this is a dynamic that actually moves the characters forward in a not entirely happy manner. In the next scene, Bao Yu hears Da Yu playing the qin, which is a literary instrument, the Chinese zither, very small. We'll get to that in a little more later. But they start talking poetry, and they have the feeling that they've met somewhere before. And he realizes that though he prides himself for his literary abilities and for his poetic abilities, he realizes deep down that she is much more talented than he is. And he processes this and is kind of okay with it. Bao Yu's mother, as we said, does not like Da Yu. Her choice for her son is one of her, a relative from her own side of the family, and her name is Bao Chai. And she is this kind of socially perfect woman that every mother wants their child to marry. I mean, she is not just attractive, but also very smart and very pragmatically smart, and knows how to manage other people. And Bao Yu is obviously attracted to her, but he realizes that his heart is really with Da Yu. And in the next scene, he has an erotic dream. He is, 13, 14 after all. And he encounters in the opera two characters, Princess Fairy A and Princess Fairy B. Princess Fairy A looks like Dao Yu. Princess Fairy B looks like Bao Chai. And he wakes up realizing that he has to make a choice between the two. So in the next scene, Big Sister arrives home. The princess arrives home from the imperial palace and bringing gifts from the emperor. And it's the same gift to Bao Chai and to Bao Yu, which indicates to the people there that the emperor supports that union, and Dao Yu is left out. Well, Bao Chai is very happy. Mom is very happy. Grandma is not happy. Dao Yu is very, very unhappy. And we have the end of the first act. The opening of the second act is in a bamboo grove. And Dao Yu is still commiserating. And in one of the more famous scenes from the show and from the novel, she is commiserating with the peach petals that have fallen off the tree. And she says, "No one appreciates you once you've fallen." And she starts to bury the blossoms. And Bao Yu is in the background overhearing. And he comes out and says, "No, stop this. I love you. You know, we are meant to be together." And she said, "No, no, no, no. Even the emperor wants me to go wants you to go with the other woman." And so she takes off. Bao Chai turns up all of a sudden and starts saying, "You really, you need to get serious about your studies. There's a job that opened up. You should take the test for your civil service exam. You could be a placement. You could be you could do everything your family wants you to do." And Bao Yu really, at that point, really expresses everything that he hates about the Confucian expectation, the fact that that promotes mediocrity and not original thinking as he prides himself on. And so at that point, the scene ends with Bao Chai saying that she has to end this all and take matters into her own hands. In the next scene, and this is the winding up the opera, Princess Jia writes a letter home, and they read the letter saying that she has lost a power struggle in the palace, and she will soon be put to death. But in the meantime, the family has to save themselves, and the only way the family can save themselves is for Bao Yu to marry Bao Chai. And so at the same time, the grandmother has died. Bao Yu has kind of gone nuts, saying, I refuse to do this. His mother says, okay, you can marry Dao Yu. But as soon as they get to the wedding, Bao Yu discovers that in fact, they have switched the women, and he's actually now married to Bao Chai. And he, at that point, goes nuts. Dao Yu ends up killing herself in remorse. Bao Yu drifts away, and the imperial army, basically the soldiers, raid the family compound as part of a anti-corruption situation. They and confiscate the fortune and basically burn the estate to the ground, and it's the end of the Jia family. Now, that sounds, I've gone on for a while, and that sounds like an incredibly long and encompassing story, but that's less than 10% of the actual novel. And so to bring this all together, they've cut out all the great banquet scenes, the scenes of daily Qing dynasty life, the context of Bao Yu in this relationship within the other family members. All of that is on the cutting room floor, as we say. And because it's an opera, a lot of these things have been compressed too. And the expectation is that everything will be filled, all the gaps will be filled by music and visuals. Now, I've talked for about a little more than 15 minutes on this. So let's actually look at some of the pictures from the show and see, not just the show, but to see what it looks like in the context of Chinese art. So I believe now I've shared my screen. Let's take a look at the first of these. Okay, hold on here. Okay, we have Sun Wen, who is one of the artists who, the illustrator who is perhaps most famous for Dream of the Red Chamber. And more than 3 decades of his life was basically converted into, was devoted to illustrating this book. And here we have one of his illustrations of the arrival of Princess Jia home. So this is the visit home with not just her, but the whole entourage from the imperial palace. This is a picture of just the gang hanging out, basically, in the garden. The beauties as well as Bao Yu right there in the center. You can always see Bao Yu because he's got a little headdress here. So various pictures of him, and of course the jade. He's always wearing jade. Now from there, we want to take a little trip down the street from the Opera House to the Asian Art Museum and to see some of the things that they have there. Now here we have a porcelain piece that actually illustrates the same kind of revelry. A lot of the guys here who are sort of Bao Yu's age and Bao Yu's social class, these guys seem to be playful, but still probably a little more serious about what they want to do with their lives in terms of studying the imperial exam. This is a Manchu robe, as it says, with peonies and butterflies. This is a very auspicious piece of dress. This is not for everyday use. This is for major ceremonial occasions and attire, and it really does display the status. And this is exactly the kind of status that the Jia family would have. Here you have a robe that actually uses illustrations from Red Chamber, and so you see this design here is blown up. We have 2 images here. We have Dao Yu playing the qin, playing the guqian zither, and Bao Yu turning up to see her. Over here we have her burying the flower petals, and we'll see a little bit more of that in live action. Here is a piece of jade. Again, there are two types of jades. People would wear jade as jewelry. They would also be buried with jade, you know, as part of the ceremonial funeral. And in this case, remember, Bao Yu was born with a jade in his mouth, so that was a sign of reincarnation from having come from somewhere. So it was a very interesting signal to the readers of the time that was happening. The use of jade, the different types of jade, not just the ornamentation, but the jade itself was very systemized and codified. So a lot of class symbolism was roped into that. But wearing jade was a sign of high morality, and wearing your morals, you know, on your sleeve, as it were, or on your chest. Confucius said a man should wear his jade at all times. So you would just never take this off. And in the novel, whenever Bao Yu did take the jade off, he would go into problems and he would be disoriented and not connected with his surroundings. So that brings this to, we're back to red. We have a nice elegant gathering, which is again from the Asian Art Museum, a look at the pavilion by the lake, and you see a lot of scholars here. You see some little game playing and a little bridge down here. All of these really informed the designer of the opera, Tim Yip, into creating a visual, not just in costumes, but also in a layered, textured look on the stage. And here is a look from the opera, just to see how much he has channeled this idea of Chinese landscape painting. Here we have, well, Granny, the matriarch in the middle. We have Bao Yu over here. We have Da Yu over here. And you see the proportions on stage here. Between the people and the surroundings, not just of their home, but also the nature, the natural surroundings behind them. This is very much taken out of the world of landscape painting, and sort of channeled in different ways. Here, again, when you look at Chinese art, I think probably the first thing that people tell you is, well, the focal point is that small figure down in the corner. Well, absolutely, in this case, the focal point is Da Yu playing the zither, the Chinese chin. And in this case, we're sending a signal here. She is educated. This was the instrument of the literati. You're in a chamber, basically. It's the ultimate chamber instrument, if you will, because it is extremely soft. It's meant for you to hear it, and maybe a couple of friends sitting around who are of your class and of your taste in terms of literature. And you would play, perhaps accompany yourself singing poetry, but also a lot of instrumental music that actually is inspired and tries to illustrate the text of the poetry itself. And by doing this, she is in a rare state, particularly, well, for anyone, but particularly for women, because women did not get this kind of training. Very, very few women got this kind of training. And when you have figures in Chinese literature, women who have this training, it doesn't bode well for them, because it's almost a tragic sense of being overly educated in their time. So you will see this. This is actually right before Bao Yu arrives, and we'll get to that in a minute. This, again, we're back to the color red. This is the Imperial Army as they storm the house and burn it to the ground. This I put in for only one particular reason. When we had the Bonesetter's Daughter opera based on Amy Tan's book and the composer Stuart Wallace, the two of them had an ongoing dialogue of that you could not show writing. How you can't show writing on stage. There's no way to show writing. Showing writing on stage is deadly. And I'm very happy to say that Tim found a way to show writing on stage. She's reading a poem, and she is actually, the poem in this has become so much bigger than her that she is dwarfed by the art that she has created. And I think it's an amazingly striking image. So now let's get to some of the characters that we have. We look at them, we've seen them from a distance, we'll look at them up close. This is Bao Yu. This is a man who, well, a boy actually, who loves poetry and he hates the career track. And I should say that the Jia family is a literary family. They pride themselves on their literary abilities, as did most, Confucian gentlemen of that era. But that was not what they did. They would hold jobs um, uh, working for the government. They would be civil servants, and their poetry was always done on the side among friends, and it was a prestige thing. It wasn't necessarily how they ran their life, how they designed their life. And Bao Yu loves everything about poetry and loves everything about the literary world except the career track and the second-rate officials who are substandard writers and learn the form but have nothing original to say, basically. And here we have Dao Yu, who again loves poetry, is the rare educated woman, and a highly educated woman, better than the most talented man in the household. And the two of them see each other right away as outliers in this world, and a place where they have to find a way to sustain themselves by poetry alone. The third presence is Bao Chai. And as you can see, a much different approach, also educated, but knows not to show it. And her main education is in pragmatism, if you will, and knowing how to manage others and to manage a household and to deal with everything that a good Confucian wife should. Now, Bao Yu's dilemma of which one to choose, that is an interesting thing, because you look at these names, okay? Bao Yu, Bao Chai, Dao Yu. Bao Yu is actually as a literary device, the combination of Bao Chai and Dao Yu. Now, I have to say, I was almost through the first volume when I noticed this. So this is a situation that literally he feels incomplete with just one, but he is most fully turned toward Dao Yu. So we have now, this is our previous cast. Currently, Konu Kim will be playing Mr. Bao. Megwei Zhang from Sichuan will be playing Dao Yu, and Hung Ni Wu will be playing Bao Chai. Now, interesting reversal. Our previous singer was Chinese, and the two women here were Japanese American and Korean. Now we have two Chinese women playing the female roles, and the tenor lead will be played by a Korean. So we've just mixed it up a little bit. But this is what we have to look forward to. And now that we've gotten an image of the costuming, as we can see here, of the visuals, of the almost landscape settings that they work in, let's now hear some of the music and to see how all that fits in. We have here, early on in the show, Dao Yu's arrival to the house. And what you're going to see here is not just a very lush sort of Western orchestration, but you'll also see a lot of fabric rustling on the ground, which is a Chinese opera trick that illustrates traveling over water. Okay, so round two, we have, this is actually right as Bao Yu arrives in the little bamboo grove. And I should say right before he starts this, um, he's engaged in he realizes that she's a poet. She wants to hear his poetry. So he starts this poem. The text is this of this is, I found this flower planted by the wall, a lovely blossom whose leaves were wilting. Let me sprinkle morning dew on your soft petals. Obviously referring to their life before as the flower and the stone. This is, by the way, I have no subtitles for this, so I'm reading the text in advance.
I found this flower planted by the wall. A lovely blossom whose leaves are weak. Sweet flower, this is a beautiful place. Let me, sprinkle morning. Sprinkle morning. Feel soft.
And so at that point, they kind of realize that they've seen each other before. Our next clip here, this is Dayu and in the famous petal scene. Now, just before this clicks in, she has sung to the about the petals. When their beauty and fragrance fade, who cares for the fallen petals? Just like you, I am prized for one moment before I fade. And so as we open up, what she sings here is, my heart breaks to see you so untended. Just like you, I wish to fly on the wind. Just like you, I long to soar above the earth. And as we said, oops, this is, she runs away. Bayu is there and has a confrontation with Bao Chai. Bao Chai realizes that she's going to have to figure out how to manage Bao Yu. And so we lead into this. She says here, a woman's only chance for happiness is to marry well. And when required, I am inspired to take action. Now, this next scene I put in really only as testament to Karen Ho, who plays the Princess Jia. It is not a large role in the opera, but it's, as she says, important to the family. And also, Karen is the only actress, I think, that has been here from the premiere to Hong Kong for the co-production there, and then traveled on tour with the opera to 3 cities in China. And she does return here in Dream of the Red Chamber in this run, playing the princess. What she's singing here is that no one understands the weight I carry, talking about the pressures in trying to serve the emperor. Why must I bear this burden alone? And now, what is a good opera without an ensemble? Well, that's a good question, because the closing of Act One, as we mentioned in the synopsis, the Princess Jia has just brought the Emperor's gift, indicating that Bao Yu wants to marry Bao Chai, and everyone responds in their own way. And so basically, I was tempted to just play this whole thing for you and let you figure it out, because it is a jumble without subtitles to figure it out. But basically, Bao Yu over here is singing, "Why am I a pawn to my family's ambitions? Love needs to triumph." Da Yu over here is saying, "The world crushes youth and beauty. How can our hearts remain pure?" Bao Chai is in the middle of this saying, "Well, I will make Papa proud by becoming part of this clan." And Granny Jia is basically saying, riches and power should not rule our lives. Meaning is given to us by the heart. It's the emotions. Lady Wang is singing, "The emperor's wishes reflect the will of heaven. Our burden shall be lifted, and the fate of my daughter and ours are one." And unfortunately, that does prove to be true. So let's just hear the end, the final ensemble, closing Act One. And one final scene, we will show I have two different versions. Oops, I have two different versions of this. One is from long shot, as if you were sitting in the cheap seats. The other one is really like you were on stage. So I'm going to use the one with the close-ups. But this is the wedding scene where Bao Yu realizes that he's being tricked.
My wife, why stand on ceremony? I can't wait to see your face. Now we are wed. What is this? Cousin Bowtie, where's thy head? This must be a dream.
And with those words, this must be a dream. I'll let Bao Yu have the last word here and come back to our audience. Now that is my introduction to Dream of the Red Chamber. John Morris has been sort of in the background here taking questions as they've come in from the chat as we come in. And I see one question here right away. Yes, there will be subtitles in English. There were not, unfortunately, on the clips that I got from the Opera House. There are actually quite good subtitles. The actual text of the entire opera will be out. So yes, so John, I believe we have some questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Ken, for your presentation and your insights. And it was wonderful to see all those visual and musical examples from the opera itself. We have had a few questions come in, so we'll launch right into those. Are you planning to attend Dream of the Red Chamber at San Francisco Opera? And were you able to see this opera performed in China?
I have seen this opera in 2016. I was in Hong Kong. Actually, it's hard to say that I live in Hong Kong, but for 20 years before the pandemic, I went back quite frequently, and I have not been there since 2020. But yes, I was there for the performance at the Hong Kong Arts Festival, and I was also at two of the three cities in China when it was on tour. I was in Beijing and then in Changsha. So yes, I've spent some time with the opera by now, and I do hope to be back in as soon as I can get my ticket to San Francisco for next week.
Wonderful. And we have a question. Helen asks, in this opera, the idea to save the family was to marry into family with the Zhu's family wealth. And the emperor's plan was to take the wealth of both families. That's not really true, is it? The emperor has his own wealth. Is it that the emperor changed? And if so, maybe the son is not so enamored by the family? Was the Jia family corrupt?
Well, it depends on how you want to deal with that, because there are diversions and compressions and changes in chronology, and because it's like you go from Shakespeare's Iago to Verdi's Iago, and Shakespeare has a lot of gradations of what was going on here. By the time you get to the opera, no, Iago is just purely evil. Well, that is a similar situation here. It becomes all of a sudden, yes, it's corrupt. You never see the father in this opera. And so that's the thing. And the opera is its own little world there, and it's very focused on the love situation. In the book, there is a very strong pull between the father, who is essentially really harsh, and for a large part of the book, he seems like a very strong authoritarian figure, but that's at home. In the workplace, all the people around him are just doing deals on the side and are quite corrupt, and he is kind of brought down because his own family members are not behaving properly. So you have that as a situation. In the opera, I think what they're indicating is that the emperor is really trying to redistribute wealth, shall we say, and to really centralize it back in. He doesn't want any kind of competition, and the Jaws were competition. they were a big they were, you know, the Bill and Melinda Gates, basically. They were of their time. And so that idea was that it's really about the central government, and the people should be kind of under control.
Thank you. I'd love to ask you about the working relationship of the librettist and the composer, and kind of how they both got involved, if they've collaborated on other projects. I know Bright Sheng has composed several operas, and just a little more context around that would be great.
They did a show together many years ago called Silver River, which was a folk tale, basically a Chinese folk tale about essentially Chinese Valentine's Day. But you have a love story with three characters, and it was a very nice piece. It was commissioned by the Santa Fe Chamber Music Festival, not the opera company. So it was done on a small scale. It got slightly bigger. It was at Lincoln Center. It did a couple places in Asia, I remember, because of a Singaporean director, Ong Kim Sen. So they had a working relationship, Bright and David. And David, they talked about this book for a long time, and David didn't want to do it because David was very busy, and he thought that he should know the source material better than he did. And finally, so he says, he agreed to write the libretto as long as he didn't have to read the book. And it is 2,500 pages. It's 5 volumes. And I will say that is not entirely true. He read the parts of the book that he used, he read very carefully. And it was an idea of what don't you need? And once he and Bright figured out what they didn't need, and Bright had a very good idea of the structure, which is half of the work of a librettist anyway, finding the structure of the piece. Once Bright said, this is what I want, this is where I want it to end, this is where I want it to begin, then David's like, yeah, fine, I can do that. And it simplified it very well, and they had a very good working relationship, evidently. The adding that, David's relationship with Stan Lai, the director, brought Stan into the picture, and Stan's relationship with Tim Yip, the designer, brought Tim into the picture. So it was very interesting the way that the tiered relationships came into being.
Mm-hmm.
So was that everything of that question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
It's wonderful context. 2 audience members actually asked the same question, which is interesting, about the reception of the opera in Asia versus the US. If it was similar or different at all.
Well, it's interesting because when this came out, it was very curious whether it would actually fly, because there was a campaign about not messing with the classics. I think, as it was basically translated, and taking a beloved national epic and turning it into a 2.5-hour opera in English was by definition messing with the classics. But it got early on a lot of support from Chinese people in San Francisco, Chinese government people who were stationed in San Francisco at the consulate. And they saw this as something that really, it showed how much something that they view as strictly Chinese can actually, when you fit the template of international tragedy, of dating from the Greeks, taking its way through the Italian romantic opera tradition, and have recognizable characters that really sort of resonate in their own way. And when you look at this, of course, Bao Yu is a tenor. Of course, Da Yu is basically one step away from Mimi and Violetta. She's definitely a soprano. Bao Chai is that stalwart mezzo. I mean, it fits the operatic template brilliantly in that regard. The rest of it was just detail. So in that regard, yes, the Chinese responded interestingly, depending on how well they liked the book and how well they knew Western opera. And there was a fascination that, yes, we know all these characters, and wow, that's what they thought was important. Wow, and a lot of the things that Chinese readers read the book for, not least of which being the language and the poetry, that was totally gone. Except a lot of it was there in the retranslation, or I should say not a new translation of David's text, but done to kind of mimic the text and flow and syntax of the original Chinese.
Mhm.
So that was that all led to the reaction. Um, uh, there were people who absolutely loved it in China. There were people who were very skeptical about it in China.
Mhm.
So, but
Interesting.
but but the people who loved it really did love it, and we got some music critics actually who wrote very favorably about the piece, not just for the story, but for the treatment and the way that China finally has a story that's worthy of Tolstoy. Which
Mhm.
or Prokofiev, Prokofiev's works and whatever. Yes,
And that dovetails with a comment from Helen. She said, I feel so very honored that San Francisco Opera has commissioned this opera based on one of the great Chinese novels.
yeah.
Yeah.
It is probably the one of the entire batch that lends itself most to Western opera, just because of the characters and this particular. It's not exactly what the films have done. That when you're talking about a 2 hour film, it excerpts more or less the same stuff, the same storyline. And when you have a TV series, Tim Yip also was the designer of a 50 episode TV series from 2010, and that can really delve into the story. That is a little bit more authentic to the novel, but
Mhm.
but when you're dealing with a limited thing, yes, this will fit the template much more than the Monkey King or uh, or the Three Kingdoms or well, Jinping Mei might actually work for some of the same reasons, but that Dream of the Red Chamber has. But Jinping Mei is still, I think, banned in the mainland, so that'll be a little bit trickier.
Another question is there is some traditional Chinese music incorporated, and this audience member says she thought she might hear more Chinese music and that she finds the music a little bit jarring in parts.
Hmm.
So, curious your comments on that.
Well, Bright is out of all of the composers of his generation that came westward. Bright has been the most Western in many ways. I mean, his main mentor in composition was Leonard Bernstein, and if you listen to a lot of Bright's orchestrations and put them next to Bernstein's orchestrations, they can be remarkably similar, especially in the early works. When he really came out into his own, he was very much a Chinese Bartok and a Chinese Stravinsky. He was sort of working his way through those kind of models and adding sometimes the instruments, but really more of the interior feel of of Chinese music on that scale.
Mhm.
So out of all the people that um, try fusion, to use that kind of word, his music is not really it's not fusing. It's basically adapting and working within that sound world,
Mm.
and the sound world is pretty much of a piece. There are some, that said, there are some Chinese instruments in it, particularly the percussion. There's a lot of Chinese operatic percussion that's involved, and as well as the chin. Now, the chin in this opera is amplified because, as we said before, it's a very delicate instrument. It's a very chamber instrument, and there's no way that, yes, it's great for the Bamboo Grove, but you're not going to hear it in the. You take it out of the pavilion, and you're not going to hear it in a 3,000 seat opera house.
Mhm.
So that will be performed. The actual instrument will be performed, but it will be amplified.
Thank you. And thank you for mentioning the Leonard Bernstein connection. That's interesting.
Yeah, it means a lot actually of where Bright's trajectory, and he's also the Leonard Bernstein Distinguished Professor at the University of Michigan. So that,
Another connection.
yeah, exactly.
So we also just got a question in. Does the singer know how to really play the instrument that they're playing? Seems hard to sing and pretend at the same time.
Well, Periam Jo was Korean, and so she might have had some experience with that kind of instrumentation, but uh, probably not this. Now, in China, we had two sopranos who were Chinese who sang the role, and we have definitely a Chinese woman now, Mingwei Zhang, who knows this. And I have to say, watching um, two Chinese women do this role, music was all they had really had to learn. They everything else about it. This is the type of role they have grown up with this as part of their consciousness. This character is as much a character for Chinese women as much as Juliet would be for a Western woman actor. You just know what to do when you get there, and the rest is detail. And so, yes, it will be a very different type of interpretation that Megway brings to this than Purium did in 2016.
Mm-hmm. And another question I have, you mentioned that the blue fabric on the stage was a convention from Chinese opera to
Yes.
show, water. And are there other conventions kind of threaded throughout? And if so, what are a few examples of those?
Well, there are a few. Most of those are that was the most obvious one, and the one that I had a clip to show.
Mhm.
Um, but fabric is a huge thing, because also it can become the set. It can become uh, uh, all of your surroundings, and it blends well with the costuming. So I don't remember any examples right off, but of course I'll see it. I'll as soon as I see it again, I'll remember. But Tim has a lot of experience with traditional Chinese lyrical stage. So he's done Chinese opera, he's done Kunchu, he's done, I think, Peking opera as well. And of course, Stan has done shows that riff on that kind of tradition as well. So
Mhm.
um, yes, it's very much part of what they do. It's part of the vocabulary.
Yes, absolutely. Another question just came in. The calligraphy, is it some of poetry that Bao Yu and or Dai Yu have written?
I mean, in the show.
Yes, I
Yes,
think the
yes.
back,
Oh,
yeah.
oh, and the big, yes, that is actually the poem that she was reading, and there's a period when she just tears up all her poetry. She's done with life basically, and she's getting rid of all of this, and so this is she burns it, and it all catches fire. So it is quite dramatic.
Great. And another question I have is, given that there are over 400 characters and such in Dream of the Red Chamber, do you think that down the road other operas could be produced that kind of cover different characters and sections of the novel? Or do you feel this is really, the adaptation and it will kind of stand alone?
Well, this is kind of the story that everybody knows and everybody goes to.
Mhm.
And yes, they've cut a lot of it out, and they've cut a lot of the context out, because you there's a lot of family machination, as I'd sort of intimated, because mom wants one woman, and paternal grandmother wants the other woman, and it's two sides of the family fighting each other out. Which, again, there are so many people involved that it takes a while for in Chinese, there are specific words for each family member, so it's much easier to follow it in that regard. But a lot of Chinese readers I know still have to have the map, have to have the family tree, just to figure out who a lot of these characters are and what goes on. I would say in terms of opera, yes, the details might change, but this is the story.
Mhm.
They might bring the father in, they might bring more characters. It might be a little longer, but it could be shorter in some respects. But this is essentially the core story that is actually most operatic and most driving of the narrative of the book.
Mhm. Thank you. We had another question come in. The calligraphy on the wall hangings, does it mean anything or is it just decoration? And then the three characters above the archway, how do you pronounce them and what do they say?
Ah, I don't remember, actually, so I will have to look that up. But I can, if people the calligraphy, yes, those are all meaningful,
Mhm.
and it helps that Stan actually did put them together with a lot of thought aside, and my wife was actually producing consultant on that, so she was actually responsible for sourcing all of the calligraphy, which turned out to be her father on in many cases. So yeah, so it was the calligraphy choices were very well thought through, but I don't have that in front of me and I can't see what it says. So if someone wants to know, I can certainly respond to that offline.
Okay, great, great. Yeah, I'll note who asked it and then can send your response.
Okay.
And it's interesting to know that they are meaningful and
Mm.
specific. Yeah. Eddie asks, will the libretto be available well before the performance?
Well, the libretto has not been published, so that's it's been circulated just internally within the cast and crew. So it will not be published, but there will be subtitles, for each performance.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful, wonderful. Well, that is our last question. So thank you for your presentation and your responses. I'm going to welcome Peggy back to our virtual stage. I'm also going to mention that this is being recorded and it will be sent to all attendees here today if you'd like to go back and review it or watch it again. And if there are others who are interested in registering for this virtual preview, they can register on the website and it will be available to stream on demand through July 3rd. Turn it over to Peggy.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today. Ken, that was just the most interesting presentation of the Dream of Red Chamber, because I know now for one, am going to enjoy it that much more when I see the opera. Mm-hmm. And well, thank you to all of you for joining us for the last virtual event of this 21-22 opera season. And of course, hope to see you at the Opera House. But if you're unable to attend a live performance, the San Francisco Opera will be streaming these live operas and one concert. So this coming Sunday, June 12th, Don Giovanni will be live streamed at 2 p.m. The following week, Dream of the Red Chamber will be streamed again, 2 p.m. June 19th, and then on June 30th at 7:30 p.m., the Un Sun Kim conducts Verdi concert will be streamed. Check out the San Francisco website, look for the word virtual. It's $25 each. So one or the other, live or streamed live, you'll be able to see all of the events. And now looking forward to seeing you again in the fall for the centennial season of the San Francisco Opera. Thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.